My name is Valentin. I'm here to tell a little tale as well of a not just entrepreneur, but also psychologist. So let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Valentin Schellhaas. My LinkedIn profile reads, I'm a business monkey on a mission to deliver a formula for happiness. I have a PhD in psychology. I lecture at the University of FOM here in Munich, founder of and CEO of the company Zentor. Previously, I've been a managing director of Expertise, CMO of Westwing, a manager with Bain. I have a family here in Munich with a 9-year-old daughter, and I usually live in Munich, but I experiment and live in other countries as well. That's my brag slide. That's the one I use to impress, to win a pitch. Antoine called it a fairy tale. I love that word. Let me show you a different picture. Can you guess what that is? Good one. You're good. That's a heartbreak. It stays somewhere else. My new love, 2 universities, Barcelona, a fight, Munich, a job change, PhD, Istanbul, kite surfing, new job change, the birth of my daughter, someone dying, breaking a leg, job change, vacation, a big question for why, starting of a new company, and a transition to Mexico. This is a so-called life lane that looks at the ups and downs of a usual life. And you can see one thing. It has its peaks and it has its troughs. And despite the previous slide you saw, CMO, head of this, head of that, it's not just upwards, right? In fact, there are a lot of troughs, a lot of downturns in there. And a couple of particular ones actually on that side where you can see the big why, the question for why. And if there's one thing I learned through being an entrepreneur myself and actually dealing with leaders, because part of what we do with Zentor, my company that I founded, is training leaders and training other teams how to live a fulfilling life, how to be successful, and how to be resilient. Particularly people that seem to have it all, that seem they should be happy, they should be super lucky. These are the ones that are particularly often lost and unhappy. Because they kind of like ended up somewhere at some point in time where I realized at the very top, how did I end up here? Why am I here? Like, that's not my dream. And they at some point in time realized they've reached or been living to an expectation that was not their own, but someone else's. And that's the one thing I want to talk about, right? Specifically, like that, how the people that are most successful sometimes tend out to be the least happy in that regard, what you can learn from that. Now, I'm not trying to say that success by definition requires unhappiness or the other way around, like that there's no clear correlation. In fact, the correlation is quite the opposite. There's been lots of studies on that looks at the relationship between happiness and job satisfaction, between positive emotions and these kind of things. So there's always been a correlation between the two in many, many studies. But there's a very long, interesting meta-analysis with a cross-sectional analysis done. That means that you can look not just at correlation, but you can look at the causation from one of the other. And guess what? That correlation actually runs the other way around. The people that are more happy are more likely to be successful. It's not the ones that are more successful are likely more happy, but the other way around. So it's not, I need to be successful to be happy, which is one of the common misconceptions that many of us strive for, entrepreneurs in particular. It's when I'm happy, I'll more likely be successful. There's a very inspiring TED Talk, in case you haven't seen that, from Sean Aker that says, a brain in positive mode is 31% more productive than a brain not in positive mode, right? And that's true from a neurobiological point of view, right? Because you release dopamine, you release like the hormones that actually allow you, the endocrinological system, allow you to learn stuff better if you're in a positive mode, right? So that's why success comes actually after being happy. Another misconception that we have, I need to be rich. I need to make it to the top because money is going to make me happy. And there are studies on that as well. So I'm going to show you a couple of studies. And there's been one that's been proven a couple of times It's called the so-called happiness income paradox, that looks at the relationship of the GDP, which is on the bottom part, so the development, growth development product of a country, and on the y-axis over there, the annual change in life satisfaction, so happiness. And you would assume, like, if a society moves upward on the wealth distribution, everything else, people should become more happy, right? What you see is actually there's almost no correlation. If anything, it's a negative correlation. So the more countries develop into wealth, the less likely they become more happy. And then you could say, like, well, okay, that's on a macroeconomic level. There are so many other factors factoring into that. Let's look at the individual level. And here the same. There's a big study, I think several of you might have heard that looks at what happens in relation to your income at the bottom. Like if you increase an income, that's gross household income. What happens to what is called positive effect, that red curve over here. And yes, there is some form of relationship, like up until $75,000 gross household income, there is some positive development of your life satisfaction or happiness. But above $75,000, and there's a similar study in Germany, it's around 60,000, 63,000 euros, there is no increase in happiness. So anything as a household gross income, you will not gain any more life satisfaction and happiness on that. So you don't need to be rich to be happy. You need to make sufficient money. Third misconception, we make good decisions when it comes to our happiness. We all assume that because we're smart people. Let me give you a small experiment. Classic. 50-50 chance. I'm going to do a coin toss. Heads, you lose $100. Tails, you win $100. How many of you will play the game with me? No one, of course. Now let's change the wager. Heads, you still lose $100, but tails, you win $110. How many of you will play now? Let's raise the stick. First one, thank you. Second one, let's raise the wager. $150 is what you win versus $100 what you lose. How many will play now? You still play, I assume, right? Otherwise it doesn't make sense, okay? Got it. Couple more. 200 versus $100. How many play now? Okay, you're still a conservative crowd because the usual answer is at 200, about half of the people begin to play. Why is that so, right? Maybe you can say $100 in this context might be a little bit too much, but assume I've given you $100 before, so it's actually you're not completely losing it, right? So you're just like giving it back to me. Let's assume that as a baseline. Technically, from a purely rational or economical point of view, the moment I say you win 110 or 101 euros with a 50-50 chance versus you lose 100, you should play that game because rationally speaking you should. But we don't. Because we as humans, we don't make rational decisions, we make psychological decisions. And that theory behind that is a very famous theory. It's called prospect theory. It looks like that. You don't need to understand that in detail, but it basically has two functions. The one thing is, anything you lose is more painful than the same amount you gain. It's called losses loom larger than gains. So it's more painful to give up something you have than to win something which you don't have. And the second thing is, the more you repeat it, the less kind of like you enjoy it. So it's diminishing returns. So the first time you win $100, or the first time you have your salary raise, it feels really great. The second time the raise, it still feels good. The third time, it gradually decreases. It's still the same amount, but we feel it differently. Second test. Which of the dots is bigger? The red one? Or the red dots is bigger? The right one or the left one? Who says the right one is bigger? Who says the left one is bigger? Okay, you've seen this before. But stay with me. You have to convince yourself that they're the same, right? Because you see clearly that this one is bigger. You see that. Your brain tells you, I know that, he's tricking me. But you see that this one is bigger. It clearly is bigger. Now you don't see it. Now you see it. Now you don't see it. The issue is, these are dots, right? But assume these are Facebook profiles from your friends you're comparing, right? Your reference point. if you just see the great pictures on Instagram of someone else, your dot is going to look much smaller than that dot, right? Your own profile. Like the comparison is always relative. My car versus my neighbor's car, if you have a car. Where my colleague went on a vacation versus where I go on vacation. We always compare ourselves, and we compare ourselves usually to the ones that have something bigger because that's what stands out. So in comparison, we take the wrong comparisons. We don't take smart decisions when it comes to our happiness, right? So how do you find happiness? So I began my little quest. And one of the first studies I also came across looks at the relationship between age and happiness. And that looks like this. That's the usual time you have when you spend that. The happiest time around 20, like we don't have studies on the lower end. And then it has a big trough, and then it goes back up. So you can imagine the time that I had my little question of the little why at the bottom. Remember that from the big lifeline at the beginning, right? That's when I hit that. It's called a midlife crisis, self-entitled. And I looked actually further into that, right? I looked further into the research because it turns out the more you spend time, the happiest time in our life is usually our childhood. And the more we grow up, we seem to unlearn how to find happiness. And the same happens as a society. Like you remember the study before. But the same happens. The more we grow as a society in terms of wealth, in terms of education, in terms of access to medicine, which are like enablers of happiness, the less we are able to find happiness. By now, suicide is the leading cause of death for men between 50 and 49 years old. If you take the whole population, it's still number 2. 1 in 5 people in developed countries now have some form of mental health issues, most predominantly anxiety and depression. And if you look at any statistics that look at like happiness metrics in society, they flatlining, especially in developed countries, sometimes even going down. And mental health issues, just to give one detail on that, by now mental health issues account for the second biggest reason of sick days. So that also has an economical impact, right? So by now it's number 2 of the reasons. For women it's actually number 1. And this study is 2021. I think the most recent study actually is that it has surpassed that. But what is even more striking is that in the past 20 years, the amount of cases and the amount of sick days have doubled for mental health issue in developed countries. This is example Germany. None of the other have developed. They're all flatlining, only mental health issues have doubled in the past 20 years. So something is going wrong. They got me asking, what actually is happiness? Well, you could ask, in today's world, ChatGPT about happiness. This is what ChatGPT says. Happiness can be defined as a state of well-being and contentment, characterized by positive emotions such as joy, pleasure, and satisfaction with one's life and circumstances. That is scaringly accurate. Scary how well AI knows us in terms of happiness. But I would wager it can describe it, but it can't feel it, right? So I have a different proposition of how to find happiness, and it goes like this. Remember that, right? So if this is your reality, the experienced reality, and this is your expectation you have, not your conscious one, can be very subconscious, just what you assume to be there, then everything that happens above is a moment of happiness. And everything that happens below, moment of unhappiness. So my proposed definition of happiness is, moments of happiness arise when our experienced reality, what we live every day and experience, meet or exceeds our expectations, right? And then the question is, well, how can we increase our chances to live a more fulfilling life? We can look and try to find more happy moments, right? And that means creating opportunities for happy moments, but also living them, being present, enjoying the small things, taking a breath in the sun, the laughter of a friend, the coffee after your lunch break, whatever that is. The second thing is managing your expectations, because you saw that line, right? You saw that line that has 2 functions. If you see that coming back. One way to increase your moments of happiness is to work on your expectations. Simply by lowering them and being sure that what happens, because usually what happens is that line goes upward, the expectations, as we develop, it goes up, right? Just being conscious of that and being mindful about what our expectations are. So that's one way to increase that. So managing our expectations. And the third one is, that's the way I learned it the hard way, don't lose track of the bigger picture. The reason why you do things. Right? And then the question always is, okay, managing expectations. Mindfulness meditation is a good strategy, by the way, that helps very well for that. How do you actually find more happy moments? And how do you kind of like keep track of your bigger picture? And the interesting part is, that's been extensive research with numerous approaches. But the answer hasn't changed in thousands of years. It's the same reasons we've known for millennia. The three main sources for happiness is having some form of purpose in life, knowing why you do stuff. The second is having something you are passionate about, where you feel engagement, where you feel energy, the stuff you really get into the flow. And the third one is, we're social animals, right? Some form of, call it love, call it appreciation, call it connectedness. Right? So I want to leave you with one quote, which I really like, that says, the most dangerous risk of all, the risk of spending your life not doing what you want on the bet you can buy yourself the freedom to do it later. And how do you do this journey of finding that? Well, I have several lessons learned along the journey, but I've run out of time. So let's chat. Thank you.